Okay, it looks like it's past and we've got a decent number of people here, so I think let's get underway. My name is Marco Bowder. I'm from the events team here at Register Scotland, and I'll take you through some of the housekeeping points quickly while we wait for a couple of extra people to join the meeting and, well, just so we've done the housekeeping. If there are any technical issues, or if you encounter any loss of audio or loss of video, I highly recommend disconnecting from the webinar and reconnecting. That seems to sort out most of Teams' little glitches that we encounter from now and then. If it is something at our end, I'll pause the webinar and try and get us underway again as quickly as possible. We welcome questions at any time during the webinar, so please just pop your questions in the chat function within Teams, and we'll pause for questions at the end. Lastly, I just want to say that this meeting is being recorded, so we can publish it on our, I can publish the presentation on our YouTube channel afterwards, just to make you aware of that. Okay, and with that, I think we can get started. I'm joined by our three wonderful presenters today, Jennifer Henderson, Janet Egdell, and Andrew Harvey, whom I'll let introduce themselves later on. And I think we'll move to slide 2. So today we're going to cover some of the, pardon me. Today we'll cover some of the challenges and opportunities of the last financial year, how ROS has delivered for its customers, and there'll be an opportunity for a question and a bit of a discussion afterwards. As I said, feel free to ask questions at any point during the event. And with that, I think it's time for me to hand over to Jennifer Henderson for what we do and why it's important.
Thanks, Marco, and thank you everyone for joining us. I'm expecting if you have joined this webinar, you probably already know what ROS does and why it's important. But I would take the opportunity to encourage you, if you haven't had a chance yet, please do go to our website and have a look at our annual report and accounts. We've got an hour together today, and that I don't think we can do justice in an hour to everything we've done in the last year, but there's lots of good explanation in our annual report and accounts about what we do, the statutory basis on which we operate. But just as a recap, we keep the public registers of land, property and other legal documents in Scotland, and we're now up to 21. I'll be covering later. We brought our 21st register in at the start of this financial year, but the year we're reporting on, last financial year, was obviously where all the preparatory work was done. Again, you'll be familiar, Scotland's land register is the oldest national land register in the world, going since 1617. And one of the things we're very heavily engaged in is the process of moving all the land in the old Sazing register into a more accessible map-based form, either by getting it onto the land register or by doing our Unlocking Sazings work, which we'll again be mentioning later. You'll be aware that land on the land register is underpinned by a state guarantee, and that it really means you can prove ownership of what you're selling or borrowing against. And that is vital to underpin the economy. One of the reasons we exist as an organisation is to underpin the economy in Scotland, and our registration business does that. Next slide, please, Marco. And I think Janet is going to take us through a bit of the sort of headlines of numbers from last financial year. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Yes, I just wanted to introduce you to some of the numbers. As you say, we'll go into some of these as we talk for the next few minutes over the next half hour, an hour. Some of these key numbers. First one is it was a busy year, 2021-22, and we were pleased to be able to deal with 92.6% of our registrations in the first 35 days. Of course, we would like that to be even higher, and absolutely no comfort to those that fell out of that period. But what our registration strategy is to try and deal with things as much as we can of the work as soon as it comes to us, and not have it on our backlog. So we'll talk more about that. It was a busy year, so that the number of applications way up there from the previous year when we had that kind of hiatus through the first months of COVID, dealing with COVID. So this whole report, you will see a kind of theme of how that effect of coming back out the other side of having had to go into lockdown for the housing market has affected us. It meant our income there, on the middle row, was back up to a much more healthy level, and that was absolutely tied into that number of applications. And our costs, and therefore our income actually exceeded our costs, and we were able to contribute to the Scottish Government consolidated budget last year. So that was a real sign of that kind of recovery. Just want to point out the two maps there on this slide are showing, as Jennifer was saying, about our work to deliver the benefits of a completed land register. We're showing there that we've the top one is talking about the landmass coverage. So we are between the land register and the work we're doing on unlocking savings. We've been doing a lot of work to make sure that we can answer that broad question about who owns Scotland. And so we've, by the end of last financial year, the end of March, we were up at 78% there. We're continuing the progress with that. The second map there is talking about the progress in terms of a functionally complete land register. So this is about the addresses that are likely to transact, and we're up at 87% at the end of March on that measure. So both of those we're tracking these as we can to see how we can continue to deliver on both of those. The figures down at the bottom there, pleased that we continue to have no gender pay gap across our organisation, and we had a pretty steady workforce in terms of numbers last year compared to the year before. Pleased to see our customer satisfaction figures went up. So that's just a little bit of context to the kind of our next slide, where I think I hand back to Jennifer and just thinking about moving on from COVID. They give a bit of that context. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Oh, sorry, I'll just interject quickly. Sorry, Janet. No, I'll just interject quickly. I just wanted to say, no, thanks for those. Those were both great summaries. And the next section in the presentation basically takes us through a little bit of a blow-by-blow of the different key themes emerging from this year's annual report and accounts, starting on with, moving on from COVID-19, so have been a key priority for Register Scotland. I was just wondering, Jennifer, how ROS has continued to adapt to the challenges created by the pandemic and overcome them this year, or moved on from them.
Yeah, it's interesting, I think, to reflect. I think this is obviously the second year of reporting since the pandemic happened. So if you attended this event a year ago, we focused a lot on what we'd had to do to adapt and respond to the pandemic. We talked about the work we'd done to bring in the digital systems. We talked about how we'd had to adapt to have everybody working in a very different way. This year feels like the year where we're able to say, from a business perspective, we really can put the worst impact of COVID behind us. A lot of things were very difficult for us during the first COVID year, but I think in the year we're now reporting on, we've managed to stabilise on some of those challenges. Our digital systems are what people are now familiar with, and they're now on a permanent footing. Our colleagues who adapted brilliantly to working at home have now somewhat come back into the office, and we're able to be back into a mixture of how we work so that people can work in the place that's best for them. And I think that ability to sort of say we can draw a line under COVID is why we've managed to achieve some of the numbers that Janet highlighted in the previous slide, where we've pushed up the amount of work we're turning around within 35 days, despite actually having a lot more work coming in the door. We've stabilised the amount of long-standing open casework we have. We'll cover that a little bit more in another slide. But I think it is the year where we can say COVID is no longer an excuse for why we're having some challenges in ROS. We have got challenges and we will acknowledge them, but we now feel we're in a good position to deal with them, and our finances have stabilised, which is also a good thing. So we're able to meet our costs from the income that comes in, so that the sort of financial shock that COVID brought with that sort of housing market shutdown again has been mitigated. And the other thing I'd briefly reflect on is how well we've adapted to a hybrid working model. I think if you went back to March 2020 and said, does ROS ever envisage that it would be able to deliver what it does without having most people in the office, we'd have said no. But actually what we've shown in the year we're now reporting on, 21-22, is how well we can deliver. We have many colleagues who are delivering more effectively despite not being in the office most of the time, and we get lots of positive feedback from colleagues that it really has helped them get that kind of work-life balance, enabling them to deliver effectively for ROS and enabling them to support their lives. And I think that's one of the reasons, again, in the year we're reporting on, that we've achieved our Investors in People Gold Award, because our assessor came in and could see just what a good job we were doing of supporting people, but supporting people to enable them to deliver for us. And the other thing I would just signal in terms of moving on from COVID-19 in the last year is that we've managed to sort of restart some of the work we've been wanting to get going for a while on equality, diversity and inclusion. And again, I think that's an important thing to be an attractive employer in the future and be able to still get the right people coming and joining us and staying with us to enable us to continue to deliver, that we continue that work. So overall, I see this as a year where we've drawn a line under COVID and are in a really great position to move forward. And the title of our annual report and accounts is Creating Solid Foundations for the Future, because it feels that's what we've managed to do in the year. But I'm sure colleagues will want to reflect a little bit on their perspective on this.
Yeah, shall I maybe just say a little bit more on the finance side of it, because as accountable officer, I'm accountable to Parliament for our finances, and absolutely that recovery in terms of we saw a real drop in our income the previous year through the COVID months, and really good to see that come back up to a more normal level. There's if anybody's looking at our full annual report and accounts, there's a really interesting graph, I think, that just shows the kind of 4 months where there was very little housing transactions going on, followed by kind of almost a bounce as people were getting back into buying and selling, and there was a bit of pent-up demand. And then what you see in this year for this annual report and accounts is really coming back to a much more normal pattern of housing activity. Wouldn't like to predict what will happen over the next few months, but that's a whole nother story, which we're focusing on last year, of course, at the moment. So yes, really interesting to see that, and we're able to contain our costs as we went through the year as well. So hence back on, much more even keel, and you'll probably be aware, our intention is really to break even over the housing cycle, in terms of our fees should be covering our costs. That's what we're aiming for. Just Marco, before I hand on to Andrew, maybe just one other thing. I'm just really was also pleased to see that we'd managed to sustain that customer satisfaction and actually gone up a little bit, because we did wonder whether as customers across the piece, people were being kind to us through the COVID months of, knowing that we had to spin up new digital services quickly and so on. Would we be able to sustain that? So it was really good to see in this year that we managed to sustain that. Thank you, Marco.
No, thanks, Janet. That was great. Really good to see. Andrew, to pull you in, do you have any additional reflections on the area?
Thanks, Marco, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. The briefest of introductions. My name is Andrew Harvey. I'm Chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at Registers of Scotland, but I'm also a non-executive director, so a member of our board, which means I have a sort of external perspective on the organisation, but equally a little bit of an internal perspective, given that I work very closely with Jennifer and Janet and the rest of the organisation. I think there are two things that came to mind as my colleagues were talking, Marco. One is the importance of the continued staff engagement. All of the massive change of the past 2 years, we could only ever have done with really committed staff who have been prepared to go the extra mile to make sure that we continue to do what customers need us to do. And when you look at the blip caused to our operations by the early days of COVID, it was really very short compared to many places, and I think that's a testament to the way in which our staff engaged with that. And I suppose if I've talked about staff, the other group I would want to talk about is customers, whether they're solicitors or citizens. They're all customers in my language. And Janet made the point, I think people have been indulgent of us for a period, and I understand that, and we're grateful for it. But I think people have also really quite helped us in participating in that. Okay, so which of these changes do we keep on a permanent basis? Which of the things we should run back to the hills and do them the way we used to do them? And I think having that level of engagement from customers is really, really valuable. I know that when Ros sets out a plan to do something and then engages with customers about whether this is the right thing to do, I know that's genuinely meant, and that our future services are shaped by what people tell us. Obviously, we've been through a period of very quick time change, but inevitably there will be more to come, whatever happens to the housing market. So those are the two things I would draw out looking back over the course of the past year.
Thanks very much, Andrew. That was great. Well, it's moving on to business as usual. Obviously, Ros has still delivered on many tasks that are considered business as usual during the reporting period. Janet, what would be your view on how Ros has performed over that fiscal year?
Well, drawing on the kind of accountability report, I guess, within our annual report and accounts, that sets out, our governance processes, how we make decisions, the use of our board to help us with strategic advice, and as Andrew was saying there, our kind of audit and risk committee helping us, making sure that we're managing risk and have the proper assurance there, so that all those controls are working. Really good to see that coming through from the report and our feedback from our external auditors, that's all worked well through the year, and that we've been able to keep actively managing all of that. In a way, I think some of the lessons from the previous year, from COVID and how we responded in a crisis, we've been able to keep going a little bit. So I think there's some of our governance has actually strengthened, just in terms of being able to make quick decisions. Quite a lot of we keep reflecting on, making sure that we can course correct as quickly as we need to, make sure that our resources are all applied in the best possible way. So, moving from some quarterly cycles to monthly cycles where that's more appropriate. Being able to, we did it the other week because we were due to have a board in person, and it was in Edinburgh just when the lying in state was happening for the Queen, and so we moved it to virtually, and it worked perfectly fine doing that. So just that kind of being able to flex and adapt a bit more, I think our governance has strengthened through that. So it's been good to see that come through in our report for this financial year. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. Jennifer, is there anything you'd like to add, maybe particularly with view to the open casework and how we've done with that over the reporting period?
Yeah, although I'd like to start, I think, by just paying tribute, I guess, to Janet and Andrew, and indeed all of the board and ARC colleagues, I think, and EMT colleagues, executive management team colleagues. I think Janet underplays how quickly everybody has adapted to a very different way of working. Yeah, the governance, I think we had really robust governance through the last 2 years. And as Janet says, we've adapted and taken forward some of that kind of crisis approach to actually business as usual, because it works better for us. It allows us to make quicker, more timely decisions, but that still have good governance around them, which is really important, so that Janet can demonstrate that we're getting good value for public money in how we do our business. So I think, yeah, everybody has there was always a danger, I think, that the COVID year was seen as a blip, and when it was over, everybody went, well, let's just go back to how we did things before. But I think we haven't done that in Ros. We've said what of the way we had to adapt to deal with COVID should now be business as usual, and we'll adapt again if we need to in the future. So just wanted to say that. But I think I do want to reflect, I suppose, on the problem we had prior to the COVID year, and the problem we have managed to keep on top of during the 2 years of COVID, but we certainly haven't made it go away, is our long-standing open casework. I take some heart from the fact that prior to COVID, we had a strategy, and the strategy was working. We'd got ourselves in the position where we'd stabilised the growth in the amount of long-standing open casework, and we were starting to drive that down. 2 years through COVID, that's the position we're now back in. So, and it could have taken us longer. It could have taken us longer to get to that point where we'd stabilised the amount of long-standing open casework. So I think we're now in a good position in the year we're reporting on, and in the year we are now in, to have started to get back on top of that problem. And if you're someone listening to us today who has some casework in that long-standing open casework, you can hopefully take comfort from the fact that, yeah, that strategy is working and is starting to deliver results. I think the other thing I'm really pleased about when I reflect on how we've delivered business as usual over the last year that we're reporting on is we've managed to do that despite a very significant increase in applications. It would have been easy to say at this point, well, we would have been back on top of all that long-standing open casework if we'd had a kind of medium level housing market. But to be able to say that by the end of the year we're reporting on we've stabilised despite having had a very high and buoyant housing market is a really positive thing. And I think the other thing I reflect on, and again, I hope that this gives customers listening comfort, is our ability to predict and project what we're going to achieve and then to hit those targets. We've got very good at that in the last year. That first year of COVID, everything was all over the shop, and it was very hard from week to week to predict how many cases would come in the door, how many cases we'd be able to process and get out the door. But the year we're reporting on now, 21-22, our colleagues who do all that analytical work for us have been absolutely bang on in terms of projecting how much is going to come in the door, how productive we're going to be, and how much we're going to get out the door. And that allows us to do really good planning for the years ahead. It allows us to know how many people we're going to need in which parts of the business to deliver. It allows us to start to build in that a projection that as we digitize more, and we'll come on in a moment to talk about the sort of digital systems that we continue to introduce, how much more effective they'll make us. And it allows us to start to project with real confidence those dispatch rates. And when Janet talked about the fact that in the year we're reporting on, we've driven up the turnaround, the number of cases that we're turning around within that 35 days, it allows us to look forward through the year we're in and then say, we're confident we're going to be able to do that. So customers listening can be confident when they're going to start to get things back. But that's my reflection, I guess. We know we still have that challenge to deal with, but we feel like we're in a good place to predict with confidence how our strategy is going to work for that. But Andrew, I'm sure you've got some reflections on the business as usual side of things.
Yeah, the first thing I was going to build on was what the point you were just making, Jennifer. I don't think we should underestimate you. We don't control what comes in the front door. It just comes in the door, and then we have to deal with it. And I know that we've got the team has got much sharper at being able to model that, but we're not in control. We simply have to react to it. And I think when Janet and I were talking about this the other day, I likened it to the queue of ambulances at casualty. You just have to deal with what comes in, and I think it is testament to the team and to systems and processes that Ros has got in place that service standards have either been maintained or bettered when we're not in control. And clearly, who knows what will happen to the housing market in the coming days and weeks. But again, we have to be able to adapt to that, because on the one hand, we need sufficient resource to be able to meet our service levels. On the other hand, clearly, as a public sector body, you can't have lots of spare resource lying around, and we can't indulge ourselves in that way. The second point I was going to make is the comfort is perhaps too strong a word, but the importance of the external audit opinion. So if in the sense, if you look at our annual report and accounts and say to yourselves, as I might, well, they would say that, wouldn't they, Ros? Then I think the comfort that people can get both as citizens and service users is the strength of the external audit. Obviously, as a public body, we have to be externally audited every year. Our external auditors are Audit Scotland, who are not shy in coming forward, and there's been all sorts of coverage in the public domain in other Scottish public bodies about the need for improvement. Audit Scotland described ROS as a well-controlled and well-managed business. And I think that gives people the certainty that the steps that you, Jennifer, and Janet, and the rest of the team are taking are the right things. And so a very positive external audit is I think, a real strength and a reflection of how, we have pivoted again back to business as usual and done that in an effective way. So those are some of my observations about business as usual over the past year.
Great, thanks very much, Andrew. And sorry to always come to you last. I promise that won't be the case for this entire presentation.
Fine.
So as Jennifer Trowell then foreshadowed, we can look at what was new in 21-22, and maybe you'd like to take a sort of topic each, maybe just starting with Janet and the fee change.
Yes, it amazes me that this was just the beginning of last financial year that we did the substantial fee change following the consultation and changed our statutory fees. So that was, you will recall, around about a 10% increase in our fees and across the piece of our statutory fees. Which was the first time in a decade we'd done that. We hadn't increased the fees since 2011. So we'd been absorbing quite a lot of extra cost over that time. And although we keep these under review, we did with the not just the impacts of COVID by any means, but the impacts of just that cumulative increase in other costs across the piece. It was time for us to up our fees. And so that is obviously reflected in that ability to get much back onto our even keel of a break even over the housing cycle. So really pleased that seems to have worked through. We will keep it under review and make sure that we are charging the least we possibly can, getting that best value for our customers across the piece. But yeah, that was last financial year, just the beginning of last financial year. Maybe I could hand on to you, Andrew, to talk a little bit about the audit and assurance, as that's absolutely in the ARC's remit.
Yes, of course. And of course, I'm conscious I've talked about audit for one of my answers a little while ago, so I'll perhaps be brief before I hand on to Jennifer. Without boring people, there are two types of audit. There's the external audit, stand back, look at the year and look at some of our key controls, but there's also the internal audit work, which is undertaken for us every year. ROS's approach, which I'm very, very pleased to be part of, is not to do what some organisations will do and say, look, we'll send the auditors to look at the stuff where we know we're good. We send the auditors to look at the stuff where we think we do okay, but there might be some things we can do better or differently. And so I'd pull out two areas. One in the past year, which was an audit around our data management, essentially having our house in good order so that we can do what we're required to do for our public service obligation, for want of a better term, but also have our data in a good shape so it can be used by third-party government bodies and the like. And it can be safely stored and easily retrieved and appropriately governed. And essentially the outcome of that, which was a new piece of work for us in the last year, was you've got all of the rudimentary things that you need in place. There are some improvements you can make to make sure that it is that your data is really in the best possible state for the future, because inevitably, the ability to quickly retrieve data and for us and you to be able to rely on it is absolutely central to ROS's future in any world, but particularly in a digital environment. So that was one piece of work that comes to mind. The other is some work we have done about business continuity planning, in particular around cybersecurity. And of course, you won't need me to tell you that the bar for that moves ever higher week by week. And again, that work was really very reassuring. There's been a whole host of testing that is done on a regular basis inside ROS to make sure that our systems are properly protected. Of course, I'm not going to talk about any of the detail of that, but suffice it to say that I think citizens should be assured by the level of security, safety, control, governance that's in place for our business continuity. And all of those things come together then for an annual internal audit opinion, which is carried out for us by the internal audit branch of Scottish Government, so a different public sector body. And we have a robust and mature governance structure. You can tell I'm reading, and a risk management approach and assurance framework, and we've identified opportunities for improvement. So again, I think that the strength of audit opinions on ROS from both of those two bodies that I've described are really quite important when you look back at how we've worked over the past year. Those are the two areas I was going to cover, and I expect, in fact, I'm sure Jennifer will have some more.
Thanks, Andrew. So yeah, I'll pick up on the other couple of icons on this slide in terms of what was new for 21-22. So Register of Persons Holding a Controlled Interest in Land, RCI for short, went live on the 1st of April 2022. So last financial year was the year where all the sort of final legwork was done, although it's been a long time in the gestation, this register. I was reflecting when I started as keeper in 2018, one of the very first meetings I went to was about the legislation that was being put through that would enable this register to come into being. And yeah, some 4 years later, it's now up and running. And again, there's lots of information on our website if anyone's listening and wants to understand more about this register. People who are caught by the regulations and are required to register have until the 1st of April 2023 to get themselves registered. So go and have a look at the dedicated information if you want to know more about that. And I guess I'll just also cover the digital submissions progress we've made in the last year. So the previous financial year was our big step change in terms of introducing a digital submission system, but it was always an interim step. We had a much bigger, more all singing, all dancing vision in mind. And I think this financial year that we're reporting on is the year where we've really started to deliver the system that we'd always wanted to build. If you've used our Register Land and Property system, you will know it's a step change from our original digital submission system, much more structure to the data you provide, provides the basis on which we internally are going to be able to automate more of our processing and therefore go even further. Janet said at the beginning, we want to get the number of cases turned around within 35 days up and up, and it's automation that's going to be part of the key to that. So launching RLP, and again, if it's not familiar to you, there's plenty of dedicated information on our website and specific webinars on that. And I think also just reflect in terms of what was new last financial year, doing things like moving more and more of our stuff to the cloud, which is pretty much invisible to our customers out there, but makes a big difference to how we operate internally and underpins things that we've managed to introduce this financial year. Things like self-service copy deeds, which will be something we'll be singing about in a year's time. That's underpinned by that groundwork that was done to get everything into the cloud, that's allowed us to provide those new systems. So again, lots of progress, lots more to do, but lots of progress in the last financial year to really move to our vision of being a fully digital end-to-end registration system. That's me, I think, in terms of what was new. Marco?
Thanks very much, Jennifer. And yeah, it's been great to see people engage with the RCI and the RLP launch over the past year. And as you said, there's tons of information available. To shamelessly plug our own webinars, we're running one on RLP on October 5th, which gives an overview of the service and some of the new features that have come in. So do please check that out. And also one on the RCI a little later that week. So both those available. On the subject of customer and stakeholder engagement, we come to our next slide as well. And customers are obviously at the heart of everything we do at ROS, and maybe we can have some reflections on how we've done on that in that past year. Maybe starting with you, Janet.
I really, Marco, just want to build on what you've just been saying about, the webinars and so on that we've been running. So over this financial year of this annual report and accounts, we hosted the Future of Conveyancing conference. We had 300 people at that conference, and really, really good feedback in that, and really good engagement. And actually from that, some of the things that we're now doing with our Register of Deeds and coming with digital registering things with actual digital signatures has kind of flown from that conference. So some really good work done there. And yeah, I think it was 55 different events that the team ran last year, and another 20 that we contributed to other people's events and were speakers at. So, really pleased with the engagement we get and the feedback we've got, good feedback ratings for people appreciating that. So just really appreciate that. Has helps us, back to Andrew's point around, hear what customers want from us and what the needs are, and make sure that we're planning for what will be needed in a year's time and so on. Yeah, really appreciate all of that. Maybe over to you, Jennifer, to talk a little bit more about some of the internal stuff.
Yeah, and I guess I'd reflect that we can only do what we do for our customers because, as Andrew said earlier, we have dedicated internal colleagues who work very hard to deliver, and we work hard as a management team to make sure we're setting the right culture and climate to support them. I think a real highlight for me last financial year was getting our Investors in People Gold Award. That's a real sign that we are doing the right things to support our people in being able to deliver. Underpinned, I think, by the work we've been doing on equality, diversity and inclusion, and I've been really pleased with some of the external recognition we've had for that. Things like how we support colleagues who also have caring responsibilities has got us external recognition. But the other thing I guess I'd highlight that we've really got going on in the last financial year was recognising that as we develop as an organisation, as more of what we do can be automated, as more of what we do is digitised, as more of what we do is about our data, we're going to need colleagues with different skill sets to the skill set we have now. And we've launched a very successful internal programme called Grow Our Own to take colleagues from all backgrounds in the organisation who would like to reskill themselves into being digital data people. And they go through a formal training programme, very intensive programme, and then they're parachuted into the parts of the business that need more of those people, where it's pretty tough for us to recruit in from the external market. And that is going to mean that ROS has the people it needs in the future with the skills to serve customers in the future, as well as having the right people now. So that's been a particular highlight in the year we've been in, I think, to be able to make progress on that and demonstrate to colleagues that, we will continue to support them to be able to have the skills they need to support us and have great careers in the future. But Andrew, we're coming to you last again, having said we wouldn't always do that, but did you want to reflect on anything on the customer, stakeholder and colleague engagement?
Yeah, I will. Just one thing, and quite briefly, Jennifer, and it builds on what you were saying about building our digital skills. I wouldn't want anybody to go away thinking, oh, crikey, they're sort of learning by doing at ROS, because I think an accolade in a way, or a recognition of the skills that we've already got. Those in the call will know that Scottish Government has responded very positively to the need to find accommodation and a new life for refugees from Ukraine following the Russian invasion. And our expertise was sort of called out in a way in that we were invited to provide the digital support for Warm Scots Welcome, which is the SG programme. And of course, you've got people, potentially across all of Europe, dispersed from Ukraine, wanting to come to Scotland and needing to be able to self-serve on all sorts of aspects of a digital journey to ensure that when they get here in Scotland, they're safe, they have somewhere to live, they can access healthcare. And so for our team to be asked to provide the digital support in that is really, I think, a reflection of how far we've come. So that was the one thing that I was going to mention. Marco, I guess you'll pick it up from there.
Yes, thanks, Andrew. No, that was great. And indeed, having just spoken about how we've left you last, you're in fact up first on this issue right here. Being as a non-executive director and chair of the Audit and Risk Committee, transparency is very much in your wheelhouse. What are your views on how ROS has performed in the last year?
So I think transparency has now become, over the past 3-4 years, absolutely central to the way in which ROS does its business. I remember a very early conversation with Jennifer after she arrived, where we both reflected on the fact that we thought this was an area where ROS needed, frankly, to do better. And I can remember saying, look, ROS is at one point, beyond that is what the contemporary standard for transparency in the public sector is. And actually, we should aim to get a bit beyond that, because expectations of how public bodies are accountable, in our case to Parliament and also to citizens, are quite rightly only moving in one direction. And so events like today, the way in which we launch our annual report, Jennifer's appearances before committees of Parliament, because we report to Parliament rather than to Scottish Government, the series of webinars, the consultations that I talked about earlier on, I think all go to our transparency. And of course, that everything we have talked about today and much, much more is available on our website. But beyond all of that, funnily enough, not a coincidence, I am sure, that maybe 2-3 years ago, Audit Scotland, in their audit of ours, said, ROS is okay when it comes to transparency, but there's a lot more that can be done. And when we had our Audit and Risk Committee review with Audit Scotland only last month, they said to us, well, ROS is now an exemplar of good practice, so we will send other Scottish bodies to look at the way you publish your board minutes, the way you hold events such as this. So I think ROS has come on a journey. It is a journey that is inexorably going in one direction. I'm sure we haven't reached the ending point, but I think it's an area in which we've worked really very, very hard indeed.
Thanks very much, Andrew. Janet or Jennifer, did you have any reflections on that or anything else you wanted to add?
Not really from me, thank you. I think Andrew's covered that.
I'll just add one thing, I guess, which is, for folks listening, I mean, one of the things I'm keen on is to understand what else people would like to know. I think we've, if you've looked recently at our website, we're publishing much more on our performance data, but we want to be more transparent. If there are things we're not putting on that information that people would like, please do provide feedback, because it will be that it hasn't occurred to us that someone might find that useful and interesting rather than a deliberate omission. Andrew mentioned things we've started to do. We now publish our freedom of information responses. They're obviously anonymised, so people don't know who asked the question, but those kind of things. But we go a bit further than that. If we think, well, this would be something we should be talking about anyway, we think about how we incorporate that into our performance reporting. So hopefully people who are listening today can help us identify other areas where we can be more transparent. So if you have any feedback on that, please do let us know. That was my reflection, Marco. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennifer. Maybe just to add one thing from that, from an events point of view, if I can plug in, we're supporting the Law Society of Scotland in their presidential tour. So that is maybe another opportunity to give us any feedback or engage us in a conversation if there is something you wanted to raise with us. Those tour dates are available on their website, however. So then come to our sort of last key theme, which is looking ahead and creating a solid foundations for the future, which, as mentioned, was the title of the annual report. So did anyone have any final thoughts on the period of 21-22 and thoughts of what the future might bring for the current fiscal year that we're in at the moment?
Well, shall I kick off? Maybe just with that second icon almost around the corporate plan. Absolutely, we picked the title for a reason, that we maybe there were areas as we've reflected that we would have liked to have got further with this year, but we hope the foundations are now solid for going forward. And our corporate plan for 22 to 27, that 5-year plan, we've published back in April, and you can really see it as kind of a I could use cliches. How many cliches can I get in a sentence? Continuation of that journey. We're on that roadmap. All of those, because taking 1 year in isolation doesn't actually work for a big organization, does it? Or for any of us, they're slightly arbitrary points in time, and you can see in that corporate plan we're really wanting to just keep increasing the value and the benefits we're providing for our customers and for the citizens of Scotland, adding the registers, adding new registers, and being able to deliver better customer service, deliver more timely, make sure that we can increase the rate of turnaround of our registrations, and that we can do much more on the data side that Andrew was talking about, in terms of kind of growing, making sure that the wealth of information we have is there and available and easily accessible for whatever purposes it's needed for. So we're kind of, that corporate plan is really all about just building on those foundations. That was my thought for the future. Shall I hand on to you, Jennifer?
Thanks, Janet. And I guess I'll build on that. I think one of my reflections for the future is we've gone from a vision to a plan. We know now how we are going to deliver our digital transformation journey. It's gone in 4 years. It's gone from being we will do end-to-end digital registration to actually now most of the elements to realise that vision are in place, and we know how we're going to build and deliver the ones that we've yet to do. We know what that's going to mean in terms of delivering the benefits of a complete land register. We know how we're going to do that, and those activities are underway, and we've got a timeline to do that in. We know how we're going to drive up the amount of casework we can turn around within a particular time, and we know how we're going to clear all our long-standing open casework. So I'm very confident, I think, that the things that we've been working very hard for the last few years to get in place, I mean, it was a good title for our annual report and accounts, because I do really feel all the foundations are in place and we can confidently build the kind of structure on top of them that will allow us to deliver what we've set out in the corporate plan. And I think the other reflection I have for the future is we've been through a pretty seismic shock in terms of having to cope with COVID. We've been having a lot of discussions internally about that won't be the last seismic shock we face as a business. There'll be other things that, disrupt what we're planning to deliver. But I think we now have a really effective way of working that means actually we'll be able to stay on course. The things we know we need to deliver to give our customers a land registration system that's fit for the next century plus, we will get that done over the next few years, even if the wider world throws some disruption and turmoil at us. We think we can stay on track, and that's a good place to be, I think. So I guess I will pause there and let Andrew come in with some reflections.
Thanks, Jennifer. Just 2 or 3 things that came to mind for me. I mean, the first was I was looking back at our corporate plan about some of the things that we wanted people to say about us by 2026. And I think you've set out how we're en route to that. And we say in the plan, the register land and property function covers everything I need to do and saves me so much time and effort. And we're on the way to allowing people who use our registers to say that. From a staff perspective, one of the things we want people to say about us is, Ros has supported me on a hybrid journey. I can be in the best place to do the type of work that I'm doing that day. And I think those 2 things go hand in hand, giving our colleagues the freedom and the tools to do the best possible job, to deliver the best possible service for service users. And I was going to go on and say, I was almost going to disagree with you, Jennifer, because you said, well, we've gone from a vision to a plan. And of course, the harsh reality, which you later in your answer sort of pulled out, was that we probably won't ever implement the plan we have in the precise form it is. But I think that speaks to agility, which is, you know, I think we've demonstrated, goodness me, we've had to learn, haven't we, very quickly how to be agile. But I think there is so much learning to come out of the events of the past 2 years, and I know that Ros is capturing that. I think that's really important. And the third thing I was going to make, in a way, no apology for, is we'll keep asking you as customers and citizens how we can do better, and to have your ideas and input into the way we're developing our service, because we're very, very clear, I think, and I hear it regularly from Jennifer and Janet and the rest of the team, that that's the only way to, we do not believe we know best. We certainly have all sorts of technical knowledge about the gubbins that sits within the system, but actually what customers and citizens want, you know far better than we do. So those were the things I thought about, Marco, in terms of Ros's future in the coming years.